And I've been covering the story of Sinclair Broadcasting Group for some time. I think it's about 12 years, actually, because I first wrote about them in the aftermath of the 2004 election. And that story, which I wrote about as recently as 2 weeks ago, recently went very, very viral after Deadspin.com put together a video of their poor news directors around the country and news anchors around the country reciting the words that media conglomerate was forcing its on-air talent to read. Our next guest knows a lot more, however, about Sinclair than I do, because he worked for them as a news director. Aaron Weiss spent 14 years as a local news producer, as an executive producer, and as a news director. He is now in the nonprofit sector, living in or near Denver, Colorado, and he joins us now. So first of all, Aaron, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks very much for inviting me, RJ.
Oh, absolutely. Now, tell me, you were working for a local station that became a Sinclair affiliate. Is that what happened?
That's correct. I was 35 years old. I was a young news director earning my stripes in a small market. It was a small, struggling station, part of a station group called Pappas that had fairly infamously gone bankrupt a year or two before. So we knew at the station that at some point someone was going to come in and buy the station and our sister stations that were part of that Pappas group. So it wasn't a surprise that folks were coming in kicking the tires. I think there were one or two other groups besides Sinclair that were looking, but it ended up being Sinclair that bought the station. And they were at the time in a huge buying spree. They were in the process of becoming the largest station group in America at the time.
So that, by the way, that's how I wound up working for AIG some years ago. Working for
everyone gets acquired eventually.
Yeah, acquisitions are sudden transformations in human life. So Sinclair bought your news station, and you were the news director. Yep. And I think you spent a little time trying to calm your staff down, that maybe they weren't as bad as everybody said they were, right?
Yeah, I went in with an open mind. I'd heard stories, of course, because I'd been in the business for more than a decade at that point, and everything that you started had writing about years before, the swift boating of John Kerry. I was aware of that. You kind of had to be. But from my perspective, it seemed like they'd kind of calmed down after that. They might have learned their lesson. And I figured maybe, well, clearly overly optimistically, that they couldn't all be true, that all those stories couldn't be a fair or full accurate picture of the station group. And as it turns out, I was wrong. They were all true. But I did go in with an open mind.
And I don't know exactly what happened, but I imagine you met some people from Sinclair, and they were nice enough people, and you went out to lunch or whatever. Was that part of the whole process?
Yeah, fairly early on. I think it was right before the sale closed. They brought a bunch of the new news directors from different station groups that were all being swallowed up by the Borg at that time. And they flew us down to Charlotte, where there was a conference going on. As it turns out, they flew us down to that conference because the conference offered to pick up all of our hotel rooms. So Sinclair was able to save some money by subjecting us to some sales pitches while we were down there, which, all right, it's a little bit of a cheapskate move, but whatever. It's a couple days in North Carolina at a hotel, and that was fine.
So was this for like condos or something? Or?
No, it was a broadcasting conference.
Oh, okay.
We were the target audience.
Yeah,
there were some presentations from different vendors that make broadcast gear, basically.
So right away you learned that your future employers may or may not be right-wing dictators, but they're a little tacky.
They were thrifty, without a doubt.
Thrifty, okay, thrifty. All right. Now, but you went in with an open mind, more to your credit than anything else. When did you get a sense that maybe this was not going to be the benevolent relationship you had hoped?
It was pretty early on. Even at that first meeting, one of the executives who was there they talked about these must-run packages that I think everyone has heard about at this point. And they said, yeah, you do have to run them. And if you've got a problem with them, please talk to me. And at that point, I wouldn't say it was delivered ominously, but you also don't want to be the squeaky wheel putting a target on your back when you're there, in a room of 25 or 30 new news directors. On the way to that conference, we were all in a van from the airport, and one of the news directors whose station had been acquired a couple months prior, talked about it and said, yeah, they send down these right-wing packages, and you just bury them at 5 in the morning when no one's looking. And the implication was it wasn't really a big deal. And pretty soon after that, on one of the weekly news director phone calls with corporate, they made it clear that those pieces were not to be buried at 5 in the morning. They were important content. They were content that corporate was very proud of and an integral part of our local newscasts.
Now, for people who might not know, and again, we're talking with Aaron Weiss, who spent some time as a news director for a station acquired by Sinclair Broadcasting Group, the now infamous far-right business entity based in Maryland. Now, so just to be clear, for those who don't know, these are items that are to be read by, and correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but these are items that are to be read by local anchors, in other words, faces that are familiar to viewers in that market, and they're not, this is a message from our corporate owner or whatever. As I understand it, they are to be read as if these were the views of the anchors themselves. Is that correct?
It was a combination. Some of them were what we'd call anchor reads, stories that the anchors were supposed to read, and the company would send down a script and video that they'd read over. Some of them were what we call packages, a pre-produced story either with a reporter from headquarters in Hunt Valley or commentary. And they were always labeled as commentary, but the expectation was still that your local anchors, who are the ones with that trust and that relationship with the audience, would introduce those commentary pieces.
So even when the commentary was, so are you speaking, for example, of this fellow Boris Epstein? Was he on the scene yet?
Not during my time. During my time, it was just a guy named Mark Hyman, who is still with the company. He's been with corporate for years and was their main commentator for years and years before Boris Epstein came on board. And the Mark Hyman commentaries, they were kind of your traditional conservative drivel, if you can imagine a Fox News commentary segment minus 20 IQ points. They weren't great or insightful commentary. It was just kind of regular conservative junk. And I have no problem with conservative commentary. I have no problem with liberal commentary, liberal news or conservative news, but you have to own it. And what Sinclair does that to me is so unethical is that they take the credibility that the local anchors have built up over years and years and often decades in a market, and they co-opt that credibility to advance the political agenda. And that's fundamentally dishonest.
Aaron, I think you bring up such a great point. And again, we're talking with Aaron Weiss, who is a news director at a Sinclair Broadcasting Group station. Because, and the other aspect of that is that unlike even Fox, and I've certainly been unsparing in my criticism of Fox, but when you're watching Fox, you know you're watching Fox.
Exactly.
To me, one of the ethical problems with Sinclair, you think you're watching Channel 7 News or Channel 4 News or Channel 2 News, right? And yet what you're really watching in the case of this content, this mandatory content, is dictated by a corporate group that I would venture to say most viewers don't even know exists.
Right, yeah. Most people don't know who owns their local TV stations.
Yeah.
It's not something people think about.
Right, and adding on to that, in a moment in time when everyone is so outraged by fake news, and certainly the concern is legitimate, I would still venture to say that people trust their local anchors, give them what they say a lot more credibility than some random producer of a meme on the internet.
That's very true. You look at polling from Pew and others as to who you trust in the media, and local news anchors, local news in general, come out on top, that they are well trusted. And Sinclair, of course, knows that. And that's what they're leveraging and counting on to get their message across. And you don't know, if you're watching a Sinclair station, which of the stories are true local stories written by a local producer, vetted and approved by a local EP and a news director, and which of the stories are being mandated by corporate, except for like the commentary packages, obviously. But the others you don't know, and they don't label them as such.
They also, I don't know if you were, if this was during your era with Sinclair, Aaron, but they also had these terrorism news desk or terrorism news alerts. Did you run those, or was that after your time?
That was also after my time. And John Oliver, to his credit, did a fabulous job last year dissecting those, pointing out that many of those terrorism alert desk segments were literally fake news. They were picking up random clips off sites called IraqNews.com about people being cut in half by chainsaws, completely unverified, a website no one has ever heard of, but Breitbart picked it up, and then Terrorism Alert Desk on Sinclair picked it up, got rid of all the attribution, and just presented it as fact. So that was the ultimate irony to me, when you had this promo with the Sinclair anchors warning about fake news, when the only example you can point to of that happening in local newscasts is coming from Sinclair itself.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And let's talk about that for a second, because, this, first of all, this whole terrorism news alert struck me. It uses all the subliminal signals that people have developed over decades of watching television news.
It's horribly Islamophobic.
The booming news, the booming music that is a signifier that something weighty is about to be announced. And then it's, somebody Muslim-y was creating a no passage zone, or it's cut in half by chainsaws. Almost happened to me once, but that's because I'm not very good with a chainsaw. But let's talk about their fake news warning, which clearly is recent. So after your time, that's what the video was about. I've never in my life heard of an organization, a business entity, forcing journalists, professional journalists, to attack their colleagues on ideological grounds and pretend that it's their own opinion. But that's essentially what Sinclair did, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why that promo, in addition to being so creepy, is so unethical. Everything that they talk about that's happening in that promo isn't happening in local news. And Sinclair defends it by saying, well, we've got research that backs that up. And that research is coming from a company called Magid. Magid, M-A-G-I-D. They're consultants for everyone in the industry. I worked at several Magid stations because they work for everyone on what's theoretically a market exclusive basis. So maybe you work for one station that's the NBC station in Tucson is Magid, and the CBS or the ABC station in Denver might be Magid. But Magid also does consulting at the corporate level, and they do consulting at the corporate level for Sinclair. And they, from the sounds of it, encouraged Sinclair to do this and make this approach toward attacking fake news. And that to me was amazing and alarming, because Magid, up until then, I thought had just been in the business of making everyone better. But now you've got Magid providing research that fundamentally attacks and undermines the entire business, including its own clients at other stations in other markets. So that to me was pretty stunning, to know that Magid is part of this as well, undermining the entire broadcast industry.
But they're not letting the public see the Magid research, right?
Oh, of course. No one sees Magid research. Magid research is tightly held by each market, and the only time you see it is when it's part of your own station's research.
So there's one of two possibilities here. Either the research supports that in some way, which seems unlikely, or Maggot is allowing its name to be used for the first time.
Oh no, I will absolutely believe that Maggot's research supports this. Sinclair, I'm sure, is doing this because someone somewhere has a panel saying it works. I don't know who it works for, because the question is, what audience are you targeting? And I could make a guess, but I would truly just be guessing. But I absolutely believe them that they have research that says that promo was a great idea because they made all 100 and whatever number of stations do it. So I'm sure they have research that told them to do that.
Right. I was talking about research that actually verifies that there's some form of fake news being...
Oh, right. Not that.
Yeah, no. But no, I'm sure as a marketing tactic, it's terrific. But so I guess we're going to have to wrap up soon. But last question for you, Aaron Weiss, because you've been a news professional for so long, as well as at least for a brief period of time, a Sinclair news director. Do you think this signals a new era of predatory and politicized news competition, where news organizations are actually going to openly attack their competitors and peddle an ideological line at the same time?
Good question. I mean, the broadcast industry overall is changing and will continue to change. And we can have a whole separate hour-long discussion about the fundamentals of the local news business and what's happening to local broadcasting, what's happening to local papers, and the future of local journalism, which I think is very much in doubt because the business model is in doubt. Whether that means local news eventually transforms into something that looks more like the cable news landscape, I don't know. Maybe you could see some station group coming in and say, all right, we've decided to make a business decision that doing what Sinclair does, but on the left, is a good business decision, at least in some of these markets. I would hope that if they do that, they do it ethically and say, all right, if you're not on board with that, here's a contract buyout and good luck to you, because, again, that gets back to the fundamental dishonesty of what Sinclair does. And maybe you'd see that local news becomes more like cable and more like talk radio. I'd hope that there's still a role for the true, respected, down-the-middle journalist in local news. I think there will be, and I think hopefully over the course of the next couple months or years, it becomes clear that what Sinclair does is not the same as what other local stations do. And eventually, hopefully, those local anchors and reporters who are trapped by what Sinclair does will find their way out. But that takes a while because contracts are long and brutal and you can't get out of them. That's something that more people need to understand. It's not that easy to get out when you find yourself in this situation.
No. And I think that's a great summation, and I'll only add for myself that I consider what I do advocacy journalism, but the journalism part comes first, and if the truth doesn't conform to my position, I tell the truth. And that is not, let's say, everybody's approach. And I think that's unfortunate.
That's the difference. Absolutely.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But Aaron Weiss, former news director for a Sinclair station and expert in the field of journalism, thanks for coming forward with this. Great talking with you. Thanks for coming on the program.
This is fun. Thanks, RJ.